Goblin launch detected.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game features a new friend, some new decks, and a lot of fun. First up, new to the channel, is Will, and he's playing his Zangief deck, keeping a Basilisk Collar, Rancor, Kosei Wolfrun, Cinderglade, and Wooded Foothills. Simon is rocking the 4-color Omnath, keeping Crucible of Worlds, Arcane Signet, Island, Plains, Bountiful Promenade, Scalding Tarn, and Yavimaya Coast. Nick is playing the tried and true Kosei deck, keeping 2 Forests, Incubation Druid, Scavenging Ooze, Retreat to Kazandu, Sword of Sinew and Steel, and Prodigious Growth. I've board Will's Shalai Hallar deck, keeping a Forest, Command Tower, Doomscar Warrior, Raging Ravine, Sunfall, Rampant Rejuvenator, and Inspiring Call. I win the die roll and start us off. I play a tapped Raging Ravine. Nick plays a Forest and passes. Will plays and cracks a Wooded Foothills, shortcutting by playing out his Ignoble Hierarch and passing while searching for a land. Following Will's example, Simon plays a Scalding Tarn, cracks it, and loses 1 to also find a land. Unfortunately, I can't read, and I play a Sundown Pass, which I have come in untapped instead of tapped. Nick plays a Forest and casts an Incubation Druid. Will plays out a Kosei Wolfrun and taps it for a Soul Ring. He then taps that for a Basilisk Collar and gears up onto the Hierarch. He then hits Simon for 1 and gains 1 and passes. Simon plays a Bountiful Promenade and just casts an Arcane Signet. I just play a Forest. Nick draws and taps enough for Kosei, passing to Will after that. Will plays a tap Cinderglade and plays out the spicy Obosh before passing to Simon. Simon's got an island for turn and taps a green for exploration. He then plays 3 mana for Crucible of Worlds, which lets him play the Scalding Tarn from his graveyard, losing 1 as he sacrifices it to find a land and pass turn. I play a Command Tower and cast Shalai Hallar. Nick draws and casts Soul Ring in his main phase. He then taps that to play out a Cartouche of Strength onto Kosei and takes out the Ignoble Hierarch from the trigger. He then passes after that. Will plays a tap Spine Rock Knoll and hides away 1 of his top 4 cards. He then moves the collar onto Obosh and then enchants Obosh with Rancor. Moving to combat, he swings at Simon with Obosh. This has Simon taking a total of 10 after Obosh doubling the damage, and Will gains 10 as well. Simon taps enough in his main phase for Omnath, drawing as it enters. He then plays Yavimaya Coast, gaining 4 life back, and then plays a Plains, and makes Wurg. He then uses that mana, but leaves a green floating, and taps Yavimaya for a colorless to cast Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. He has it come in as a copy of Omnath as well, and draws a card. He then uses the floating green and the rest of his mana for a Harrow, sacrificing a land and going to find 2 basics. This has each opponent taking 4 from the original Omnath, and Simon gains another 4 life and makes another Wurg from the Sakashima version. Simon then uses that mana to cast Stunt Double as a copy of the Sakashima Omnath, drawing as it enters too. With all that copying done, Simon then moves to combat and goes at Will with Omnath, the real one I mean, and connects and passes after that. I've got a Plains for turn and cast a Doomscar Warrior, using its backup trigger on Shalai Hallar. This deals 1 to Simon's face as I add a +1/+1 counter to them, and I then swing them at him. They connect, and responding to my Doomscar trigger, I use Swords to Plowshares on the Sakashima version of Omnath, exiling it, and Simon gets some life. I then reveal Grumgully and put it to my hand and pass turn. Nick draws, but seems to be a bit short on land, but at least can remedy this with a Cultivate. He finds a basic to the field tap from his library and plays the one he puts to hand. He then taps 2 mana for a Scavenging Ooze and passes after that. Will's also struggling with lands it seems, and he just goes straight to combat. Obosh once more finds its way at Simon, dealing 10 and gaining Will 10. As he's done over more than 7 damage, Will is then able to activate the Spine Rock Knoll by only paying 1 red and cast a Mage Slayer, which is a sweet piece of tech with Obosh out. He then passes through his phases, but before moving to Simon's turn, Nick taps the Incubation Druid to make a green to exile Simon's Scalding Tarn with a Scavenging Ooze. Simon draws and plays Misty Rainforest, gaining 8 life from his 2 Omnath triggers, and then cracks it, losing 1. With the search trigger on the stack though, Will casts Pounce and has Obosh fight the stunt double Omnath. Simon then finds his land, but only gains 1 white, 1 blue, 1 red and 1 green after finding a Triome and putting it into play. He then replays the Misty from his graveyard, dealing 4 to each of his opponents, and in a surprising turn of events, Simon then mutates a Trumpeting Gnar onto Omnath, putting the mutate card in front and making a beast token. Once that's resolved, he casts a Seedborn Muse and moves to combat. He goes at will with Omnath, connecting, and then passing, untapping with my untap step. I draw and cast an Arcane Signet. Moving to combat, the Doomscar Warrior goes at will since he has no blockers, and Shalai and Hallar go at Simon, who lacks both flying and reach. Both connect, and I get to resolve my Doomscar trigger, revealing Vigor and putting it to my hand. I then play out a Rampaging Rejuvenator, and with it coming in with counters, use the damage trigger from Shalai and Hallar to deal 2 to Nick. Nick casts a Sword of Sinew and Steel in his main phase, and gears up Kosei with it. He then swings it at will and connects. He gets the sword trigger, letting him blow up Simon's Crucible of Worlds, but with nothing else, Nick passes. Will can't seem to find a land, so he decides to gear up Obosh with a Mage Slayer. Moving to combat, he tries to decide who's the biggest threat right now, which is kinda tough. He decides to go at Simon, who seems to be gaining a ton of life anyway, and his Mage Slayer deals 10 damage when Obosh attacks, and then Simon takes another 10 from Obosh himself, gaining Will 10 life. With nothing else, Will passes. Simon draws for turn and brings out a Ramunap Excavator, and then cracks his Misty Rainforest to find a land and gain 4 life. He then replays the Misty Rainforest, gaining his mana from Omnath's second ability, and then moves to combat. He swings his commander at will, and before damage, Flash mutates out a Sea Dasher Octopus onto his stack, making another beast token, and then connects with commander damage, drawing a card. Simon then taps enough in his second main phase, casting a Mirror Weave, and has everything become a copy of the Trumpeting Gnar, which, you should know, also has all of Omnath's abilities. He then cracks the Misty Rainforest, which will have him gaining 12 from his other copies of Omnath seeing a land come in, and his real copy deals 4 damage to each opponent. With that sweet play over, he passes to me. I draw and play a tapped Llanowar Reborn, which comes in with Graft 1. I then tap enough for Vigor and move to combat. I swing Shalai and Hallar at Simon, the Doomscar Warrior at Will, and the Rejuvenator at Nick. All 3 connect, and I get my Doomscar trigger again, this time revealing a Bountiful Promenade. I then pass to Nick after that, and during my end step, Nick taps a Forest and the Incubation Druid to activate the Scavenging Ooze twice, exiling a creature card from both Will and Simon's graveyard, gaining 2 life and adding 2 +1/+1 counters to it. Nick's main phase has him enchanting Shape of the Wittigo onto his commander, giving it the +1/+1 counters needed to finally be able to use Kosei's ability on connecting. He then swings Kosei at the Defenseless Will, dealing 9 damage. This has the ability dealing 9 to both Simon and I, plus Nick gets to draw 9 cards. Nick then plays out a forest in their second main phase, and remembers the sword trigger, blowing up the Basilisk Collar. Nick then taps 2 green, and is able to cast the Great Henge for a reduced cost. He taps it for 2 green, and casts a Sakura Tribe Elder, gaining 2 life, and drawing a card. He then passes, discarding down to 7. Will casts Domri Raid in his main phase, and gets bold, down-ticking the Walker to have Obosh fight the Scavenging Ooze. Holding priority though, he casts an Arc Bond and targets Obosh with it. Responding to the Arc Bond trigger, Nick sacrifices the Elder to go and find a land. Everything then takes 8, but what Will hadn't factored in is that all of my creatures aren't going to take the damage and instead get 8 +1/+1 counters because of Vigor, although Vigor will die, but at least it gets shuffled in. This gives me a bunch of Shalai Hallar triggers, which I then use to blast Will and Nick in the face since Simon dies anyway. Will then passes, and since Simon is dead, we move to my turn. I untap and cast Grumgully, using the graph from my land to put a +1/+1 counter onto it and deal 1 to Will with my commander. I then cast a Good Fortune Unicorn, which comes in with a +1/+1 counter because of Grumgully, and I get to deal another 1 to Will. This puts him into range of Shalai Hallar to get taken out, and I'm able to swing the rest of my creatures at Nick to take him out as well. Game review time. So normally I'm a little bit opposed to posting games that I win where I've won as a result of someone's misplay, although Will insisted on continuing through with this. I think it was a learning experience for all of us considering how it interacted with Obosh, and it would have been fine had I not had Vigor out in the field. It's a shame we never actually got to see him cast Zangief because I thought that would have been pretty fun. Simon's Omnath deck was strong. Having 3 of them out was insane. And it even took a turn up to 11 when he started mutating stuff onto it, which I thought was awesome. I'm hoping he comes back and plays it again so we can see a bit more of it, since copying Omnath is okay, but copying mutates is golden. Nick's Kosei deck did exactly what it normally does, which is fly under the radar, chip away a little bit of damage early on, and then all of a sudden become a massive, dangerous game-ending threat with everyone has to stop him before he gets to one more combat step. And again, kinda like I said earlier on, I won this game, so I really can't say how much I enjoyed the Shalai Hallar deck. The damage is pretty sweet, but I like the haste that Helena and Elena give, and although you lose white, it's also easier to cast spells when you only have 2 colors as opposed to 3. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.